All right, good morning, everyone. My name is John Ward, and I am the Director of the Student Counseling Service here at Miami University. I've had the pleasure of working with Miami University students for about 17 years now, so it's been a joy of mine to deal with students in all different sorts of capacities. And what we're here to talk about this morning is students who are dealing with the issue of homesickness. So what I hope to do is spend a little time talking about homesickness, some of the signs of homesickness, talk about how we might deal with homesickness as parents, families, and other supports. And then from there, possibly take any questions that you all might have about how to support your student who may be dealing with the issue of homesickness. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in at this moment. First of all, let's talk about some of the signs of recognizing homesickness and what might be going on with our students. So let's take a quick jump back to Homesickness 101. Some things that I think are really important for us to remember when we're thinking about homesickness is, first of all, homesickness is not necessarily an indication that something has gone wrong with our students. There are many students who are going to experience some level of homesickness, but it doesn't necessarily mean that things are broken, that they're not going to be able to cope. Our students are oftentimes very resilient in their ability to bounce back from dealing with any sort of social, emotional issue. And so I don't want us to panic and think just because a student is experiencing homesickness that things have gone terribly wrong for the student. One of the other things that we want to remember about homesickness is that it's not uncommon for a student who is experiencing homesickness to think that they are the only individual going through that situation or that experience. A lot of times this is going to come up because when we feel homesickness, many of us tend to start to isolate ourselves a little more. We are not necessarily connecting with others in our residence hall corridor as much. We might feel as if we don't want to connect with friends, maybe from high school, or reach out. And once we start to isolate ourselves, we don't necessarily see others around us who might be in a very typical, or very similar rather, situation. I can guarantee you, with all of my years of supporting university students, and particularly here on this campus, that when it comes to homesickness at any given time, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of students who are feeling some level of homesickness. You can always reassure your student that they are not the only one with that condition or that situation. And finally, when I'm thinking about homesickness, this idea that if it doesn't happen at the very beginning of the year, that you're out of the woods with homesickness. It can really happen at any time for a student. It's not uncommon for a student to leave for fall break and then to come back feeling a little more homesick than they did before they left, or when they were first dropped off at the beginning of the semester, or for a student to come back after the Thanksgiving recess or after the winter recess even, and to feel homesickness at those period of times. Oftentimes what we find is that a student may have really pushed themselves to get through the semester, and they wait for that break or that recess period, and then once they got into that, they got home, they have the home cooking, they're feeling much better in that comfortable environment, then it's returning to Miami University that they feel an increase in those homesick feelings. So I just want to remind you that it's not an indication, homesickness is not an indication that something is wrong. Students often feel that they're the only one. It's not just them, and homesickness can really come up at any point in time. Just to really drive this point home about homesickness being something that is normative for university students, you're seeing some stats here that about 42% had experienced homesickness by week 7 or 8. And this is coming from our annual transition survey. So we asked students about their experience. About a similar amount experienced some level of loneliness. But, and here's the really cool thing, 86% had made some friends, and 87% felt that they would be successful at Miami. So again, just reaffirming what seems common sense or common knowledge to a lot of us, it is making connections that really can turn the tide with someone feeling homesick or someone feeling lonely in this environment. So let's think about this one, some common signs of homesickness. One of the things that I do want to reiterate is that feeling comfortable, feeling at home, feeling at ease, it's going to take a little bit of time for everyone, and it's going to be different for all of us. Think back to a time where you may have made a major life transition, moving homes in a neighborhood, starting a new job. It's not day one that most of us feel settled in that new environment. And what we oftentimes have to do is to remind our students that it's going to take them a little time before they feel completely settled and at home in this environment. Students are going to experience homesickness in several different ways. I'm not going to read all these to you because we can see them here on the screen, but just because a student is not crying or just because a student isn't calling or texting home frequently doesn't necessarily mean that they're not feeling some level of homesickness. Some might be avoiding some of their responsibilities. Some might be less inclined to show up to all those classes that they need to show up to. But any of these types of things that we're seeing here, whether it's something emotional or not attending to all of their responsibilities, may be a sign that a student is dealing with some level of homesickness. So with all this, at this point, many of us are starting to think, what are we to do about this experience of homesickness? Well, what we do want to remind you of is that there are times where we don't want to just assume that everything is going to be better, and that there's times where we really do want to reach out to give more support to our students. At the point where homesickness is going to start to significantly interfere with the student's daily function, we want to make sure that we're reaching out for additional support for our students. Some ways to think about, is this impacting a student's daily functioning? Is the student able to go to class? Is the student able to take care of basic daily needs, such as getting up out of the room, getting themselves bathed and showered? Is the student getting out of the room to get something to eat? If we see declines in a student's ability to do those very basic things, then that is definitely a time where we want to make sure that we're reaching out for more support. You can also think about the experience of the student's symptoms. So if the symptoms are consistent, meaning they had this experience of homesickness soon after they were dropped off, and that intensity has not gone down as we've gone into the month of October, or the symptoms are occurring most days, or the majority of the day the students are having these symptoms of homesickness. That is certainly a point at which we want to make sure that we're reaching out for more support for our students. At times, even though we know our students the best, you may know your student the best, it might seem like more than what you can actually deal with. You've given them all the advice, the support, the coaching that you can, but it's reached a level that you're not certain that you know how to deal with it, or you're not providing the help that the student seems to need. There's also times where the student is just going to flat out ask us for additional support. At those times, we want to make sure that we are checking in with some of our additional resources that we have on campus to help a student who might be experiencing homesickness. It goes without saying, whenever we have a student dealing with homesickness, that their ability to connect with their residence hall community is going to go a long way in terms of helping them to get over the hump of homesickness. I think about their ability to connect one-on-one with their RAs or the professional staff that they have in the hall, but also I think about the student leadership that is in the hall. The halls do quite a bit of programming geared towards making sure that students have a comfortable and connected experience here at Miami. All sorts of things that they're going to do, whether it's trips, whether it's game nights, whether it's just informal conversations, whether it's going to a speaker on campus together as a group. Oftentimes that residence hall community is the first place where we want to really try and make sure that our students are well connected. The other thing that we want to encourage our students to think about doing is having some level of involvement on campus. Generally, we think about campus involvement as being a part of a student organization. This could be connected to their career or their major choice, but really any type of interest that a student has, we likely have a student group or organization that a student can get connected with to have more involvement, to have more social connection. I really think about our Office of Student Engagement and Leadership, the SEAL ambassadors, peer mentors that are dedicated to helping students make the most of their undergraduate experience through student organizations. So again, if your student hasn't mentioned this as a way that they can get connected, it might be something that you mention to a student. I also think about the health and wellness resources that we have on campus. The student counseling service, of which I direct, which provides individual counseling, group counseling, workshops to students dealing with a host of social and emotional concerns. We're one of those anchors of support for students. I also think about our student health service that we have on campus. Sometimes it may be easier for a student to walk in and talk with that nurse or nurse practitioner or physician about their feelings of not feeling as connected in this environment, and then that team referring to the student counseling service or other resources in the Division of Student Life for that student to get connected, or our Office of Student Wellness, thinking about holistic health and wellness for the students, whether it's taking part in one of the programs that the Office of Student Wellness involves, or looking into being one of the peer hawks that are going to do some of that programming. Again, thinking of ways that the student can be involved. Also, recreation. So this can be classes that are more recreationally oriented, or the clubs or intramurals, things like that that the student might have opportunity to be involved in. I also think about the student counseling service and how more recently we have launched this initiative called Campus Care. Campus Care is really set up as a brief, informal way for students just to drop in, dip their toe in the water in terms of what's this counseling thing, and check it out to see if it's for them. About 10 to 15 minutes or so. The neat thing about Campus Care is that we've positioned counselors at certain hours of the day throughout the course of the week at various locations on campus so that students don't necessarily have to come to the student counseling service to have a brief informal chat with a member of the counseling center staff. It's an initiative that is just taken off this semester, and students are really digging in and enjoying that opportunity to talk with us outside of the counseling center walls. So what can you do as family, parents, supports for our students? Number one, you can listen, right? So when we say listen, we mean active listening. Ask the student to describe to you their experience of being here on this campus and what it is like for them. Take the opportunity to empathize with the student. The empathy goes beyond just saying, I'm sorry for that experience, or I simply understand. but it's really our ability to connect with that difficult feeling that the student has and appreciate that even though we might not have that exact same experience, that they're going through something that is meaningful for them. It goes a long way to showing that we care. The other thing that we do as we listen is we don't necessarily solve our students' problems. What we might do is ask the student, after they've described to us the issues that they have, how they would like to solve the problem, what they think the next best steps might be in terms of dealing with the issue of homesickness. We can also ask the student some things to get a better sense of how they are trying to engage. Thinking about the individuals that live with them in the hall. We can ask them about the different types of organizations they've considered involving themselves in. We also think about the academic sense. Who are the classmates that they see in the classroom when they're meeting with their professors? Who are they having the group meetings with? Perhaps those are some of the individuals that they might be connecting with. Again, because it's going to be different for each of our students, it's important to get a sense of the different folks that they've had ability to connect with. And then finally, we really strongly want to think about this sense of empowerment. I will say it again. Our students are oftentimes very, very resilient. So again, encouraging them to think of various different solutions. What are the resources that they're aware of? And then we might provide the student with additional resources if they don't mention all of the resources that you think might be available to the student. We want to empower them to actually then seek out those resources. So again, if the student says they've considered talking with a counselor, we might empower them to go to a campus care session so that they can talk with a counselor informally for a brief amount of time. And it's always great for us to follow up as parents, families, and other support for our students. Thinking about not necessarily checking in with the student every single day or multiple times throughout the day, but every few days or every week or so, you can ask them, hey, have you had opportunity to join that intramural? Or what different groups have you looked into at this point? And then provide some additional coaching to the student at that point based upon their success or challenges in terms of getting connected with others on campus. As we're starting to wrap up here, I want to make sure that I highlight student counseling service and the number that students call when they want to make an appointment at our office for counseling service. We've also found that many students are going to check us out on our website before they engage in counseling at our office. They find out about all of the different services that we offer to get a sense of what it's going to be like to be seen at our office. We've recently developed a really short but neat video that describes to students what it's like for that very first appointment, to sort of break down the barrier of what it's like walking through the doors that first time. So showing them what our reception desk looks like in the waiting room, and then a simulation of a counseling session for the students, just so they can visualize what that experience is going to be like for them when they seek services at our office. Well, I have reached the end of the formal part of this discussion of homesickness, and I'm asking that at this point, if you have questions that you would like to pose, if you could use the chat box for questions, and then I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have about homesickness and how we might best support our students. So again, feel free to use that chat box, and we'll see what we have by way of questions that I might be able to address. Okay, and at this point, I'm not necessarily seeing any questions. I want to remind you what is cool about these webinar series is that this will be made available to you at a later point. So if you want to check in with the information that was provided, feel free to do that. There's also, other than just a description of the services that we provide on the Counseling Center website, we also provide a whole host of resources on various different mental health topics that are available not only to students but also to the parents and families that support students. So I do encourage anyone who hasn't had opportunity to check out the information, the additional resources that we have available on the Student Counseling Service website. I just want to make sure once again before we wrap up that no questions came through for us in the chat box. We're still not seeing any at this point. So I really enjoy the opportunity to speak with you this morning, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to this discussion about homesickness. Again, I hope you do check in with this office at some future point for some of the additional webinars that we will have coming up in the future. Thank you. Have a great morning.